Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. It's August 29, 2021. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff for helping us as always, and we'll see you back later. Clinton, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Martin Lee. Martin, thank you for attending today.
My pleasure. It's been a long time, I think, since we shared a haunt in that house, Lloyd Hall.
I was just going to say, we attended the University of Michigan together in the 70s, and we're in the same dorm, Alice Lloyd, better known as Lloydian Lunatics.
Yeah, and look where we are now.
Yeah, look where we are now. Martin, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Best thing for a human being, nourishment.
Oh, that's a good word. And what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
You know, obviously everything is digital these days, but I'm a print person. I don't luxuriate on the laptop. I like to print things out and read them. I feel bad because you're cutting down trees and all that, but as a writer, I figure it's just part of and a researcher, it's part of my profession, so to speak. I wish there was another way around it. I'm of that age before it all happened, so before the web, and that's my orientation. Always, I need things printed out. I generally deal with a lot of information if I'm engaged in a big writing project, and I need it laid out, and that's the best I can do.
I agree. Did you grow up a reader because your parents were doing it as an example? They told you to read, or did you pick up reading on your own?
I started reading after I took my first LSD trip. That's when because I found it so interesting. I had to read things to figure out what was going on there. My mother was an avid reader and very much encouraged reading. But actually growing up, I'd read a book about chess masters who were kind of crazy, these people. And I was playing chess as a little kid. That was of interest. Read a book about baseball stars and things like that. But generally, I was not an avid reader until about 15 years old. And that was part of it, just sort of a quest to understand things. And part of it was inspired by what was happening in the late 60s and psychedelic drugs, of which I'm not a particularly big partisan, these days. I haven't taken that, for decades. But it's the honest way it happened.
We have similar trips in our lives, and it's interesting. Back to information. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Why do humans collect or gather information?
Well, information in a broad sense, and you could say information is like gathering, in the old days, gathering herbs and roots and whatnot for food. But in terms of, information is a funny thing. I thought that information would be decisive, the right kind of information, historical information or whatever, investigative information, to move the society forward. But you look at what's going on these days, the problem isn't, you're inundated with quote unquote information which often lacks substance. And what we need more, I think, is context above all. But yeah, I mean, information, you'd think it'd be like oxygen, like survival. It would make a lot, you need it to proceed, but almost in this society, it's become the opposite, the way things are. We're under the tyranny of those that spurn information.
Do you think, Martin, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more hardwired? I mean, excuse me, that was the same thing. More innate or more invented?
I don't know. You think of, as a writer dealing with print media and other media, everything's contingent on the invention of the printing press, which is relatively late in human evolution. So you say it's all an artifice. It's a construct based on this technology that profoundly changed human experience. In that sense, it doesn't seem to be innate. But on the other hand, it seems to become that almost. I don't know. It's a funny kind of question. I wouldn't really know how to answer that. And I think my particular relationship with information as a writer and as a researcher is not typical, frankly, from how Not everybody is. You should see the office, boxes and files overflowing. It drives my wife nuts. Not everybody does that, but information for me is part of a professional effort.
Beautiful. Do thoughts create emotions?
They go both, both ways. Emotions create thoughts. Thoughts create the philosopher Merleau-Ponty had this beautiful line about you. One doesn't think their own thoughts any more than one beats one's own heart. And I would say that that's the statement of a healthy human being, because you can get really caught up in thoughts and repetitive thoughts, and these guys. I'm not saying that's an affliction that I experience, but I know people for whom that is the case, and where that question of emotions and thinking really can become very gnarled up and problematic and almost torturous for people. But I don't know. I think obviously they trigger each other.
That's interesting because, again, this question, a few of these questions at the beginning are either or. It doesn't mean that I'm giving you the two choices that you might answer. It's more like your hunch or your impulse or your intuition. But your observation of humans in general, do you think humans are more thinking or more feeling beings?
I mean, both, but that doesn't mean the thinking part of it, leads you in the right direction. It can lead you in a minotaur's maze. I mean, it's not, but both, and as it should be, mind body, right? It's connected. Yeah. So I would say both. And
Yeah.
what separates us from presumably from other species is our ability to mentate. Although I wouldn't presume to know what's happening with a whale, or for that matter, my cat, who seems to be pretty sharp. But uh,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, maybe it's the arrogance of human beings that we like to say we're superior because we have these thought processes that no other species has, which might be, like I say, arrogant more than anything else. I mean, for all that, or for all our thinking, how is it that we end up as the only species that pays rent? What happened there? Something went wrong. I mean, that doesn't strike me as the smart, the apogee of intelligence to construct a society in which that happens. I mean, you can, cite a number of examples like that.
Yeah. I know another example I like to do. Whoever gave anyone else permission to sell water or dirt?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that is
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, seriously.
that
For all our great ability to think, we're setting up a situation, if not to drive ourselves extinct, but with climate change, we're on the cusp of a huge crisis, which is already we're in the beginnings of it. Clearly, I mean, I live in Northern California. It's smoky outside right now, and over the last 4 years, I've had to evacuate 3 times because of fires. Fortunately, our house was not affected directly by flames, but the town I live in or near certainly has been. So this is the great intelligence of human beings that we've managed to get into this kind of situation. Not that forest fires are a human invention. These things happen for a long time, but our ability to deal with it
yeah.
seems to be we got a few things to learn or relearn. Maybe Native Americans could help out there.
I love that word, relearn, and a fill in the blank, Martin. I don't know what I think until I
I don't know. You're asking these funny questions. I don't know what I think until I'm not sure if I can easily. I think about what until
until I think about what? That's a great answer. I don't know what I think until I think about what. Okay. Um, Now these are two Alan Turing questions from 1950, just really brief. Is thinking a function of the soul?
mm, I don't know. I mean, I did major in philosophy. I should have ready answers to that, but uh, I mean, the soul is somewhat ineffable. What is the soul? Is it a function of the brain thinking? Yeah, but that's me. I I don't know if you're hearing my cat whine in the
Yeah,
background. We should
I
get up.
think I think your cat just answered it, but you answered the question with the question, Martin. You win. That's what it's all about. We're just reinventing new questions. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, apparently, artificial intelligence is supposed to be able to do all sorts of things that. So I don't know if that's thinking, but it's the end result might be the equivalent of it. And machines aren't sentient, but I don't know much about artificial intelligence other than what I hear. But apparently, it's the real deal, and it can synthesize an enormous amount of information and spit it out in a way that's functionally significant. So I don't know. Is that thinking or is that the product of quite amazing thinking? Uh, It's hard for me to answer.
Well, no, you get this. We're talking about hunches here, and you gave me a good indication that way. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Happiness. Aristotle says a project of happiness is a direction in life, right? Not a particular set of experiences. And a great, wonderful, really nice experience can make you happy, but that doesn't mean the overarching project of happiness as the trajectory is going in the future. Okay, so that's meaning. I don't know. I don't distinguish the two really.
Yeah.
But I think it's a direction of life that would have meaning. That would be in that Aristotelian sense. And I'm not an Aristotle guy necessarily. I happen to just like that phrase, project of
Yeah.
happiness. Yeah, they seem to be connected.
Yeah, I got the question from Viktor Frankl, basically Man's Search for Meaning. He says,
Mm.
happiness doesn't necessarily last, but meaning can last. But the memory of happiness, so there's variations on a theme there, definitely.
Yeah, I think his idea of meaning might be dovetail quite a bit with Aristotle's idea of happiness, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well put. So does the brain or mind or the human create consciousness or detect it? Like, is consciousness boiling away, bubbling, and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think it's the former. I don't think we create it. I think it's bigger than us. And I'm not talking about some super, whatever cosmic way of looking at things. It's just that, yeah, but I think it has to be there for, you know, again, you don't think your own thoughts as much like you don't beat your own heart, in that sense. So yet we're conscious, but we're not causing our own thoughts. And if you are, I think you're kind of neurotic, frankly. Which is not to say we're just bouncing around on the basis of what happens to flit, from from one ear and through the gray matter to the other ear. But it's yeah, I think it's the former. What you said.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you said I understand you first took LSD at age 15. Is that what you said?
Yeah, not sure how much I want to share about that. I could ruin my
Well,
reputation.
that's all right. I'm just saying.
I don't mind really, but the joke is I actually took it when I was 14, and
Oh, okay.
and that was in 1968. It was a big deal then, and I was feeling
Yeah.
rebellious and whatnot. And I ended up, I ended up writing a book about LSD, acid dreams. So,
Yeah.
it's important in my life. But uh, um, after that, or during that first trip, I made the classic rookie error of looking into a mirror. Which I would not advise for someone to do when they're tripping, because you see every little whatever is going. Not that I'm concerned about an imperfection, in the pores of the skin, but I looked at this. I looked at myself and I said, you're too young for this. So I decided to wait another year, which is not exactly. But I did most of my experience with that in my teens and my 20s, and I haven't touched this stuff for 4 decades, actually longer. So you get. I mean, very important experiences for me, and I ended up writing a book about it. A social history, acid dreams was my first book, and but that was an effort not so much about my own experiences, but the social history of psychedelics. Obviously, I wouldn't have written that book had I not had certain experiences. And right now we're in the midst of a kind of a renaissance again of psychedelic, or at least interest in it. But unfortunately, I see a lot of the same patterns repeated, and I don't want to be again arrogant saying errors, but I really don't think if everyone took LSD, climate change would be reversed. But there is that kind of messianic baggage that I thought, if there's one lesson I think we could have learned from the 60s, it was that, put down that baggage and see it for what it is rather than, what you project. But I see kind of that happening again. But now you have a whole new situation because you have, all these investors and millions of millions, tens of millions of dollars going into research, but it's a bit bizarre that scene, I have to say, because you have your typical CEO of one of these companies has never even taken LSD, and so what happens when they synthesize with or synergize with LSD? You end up getting psychedelics, which is the going thing these days. And I don't know if we meant to go into this direction, but I find it. I have to be lecturing on this soon, so it's on my mind.
No, it's good. It's good. And we're fine doing this because first of all, I wanted to thank you because
Uh-huh.
this book played a big part in my life too. In 1985, you put out a very important book, and I highly encourage people to seek it out. But the question I wanted to ask you is this idea of altering consciousness is interesting. So humans can alter their consciousness by breathing or doing exercise.
Mhm.
But then we can also alter our consciousness by taking in something like through smoke or food, like coffee, pot, or mushrooms. So, what is, the fact that consciousness, the question was, do we create or detect it? What is it that drives humans or you particular to alter the consciousness? Because we both know that so much great art has been the result of some creative people using some alter state, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So I'm just curious, I guess the question is humans' desire to alter their consciousness more innate or more invented again? It's more like just like the ship and back, you navigate this idea of why humans alter their
Well,
consciousness.
I
Just
I
brief.
think I think it is more innate because animals do it too.
Yeah,
There's been very interesting science around this. Animals that uh, their supper is grapes that have been sort of sitting on the ground and ferment. So it precedes the human impulses for sure. Um,
yeah,
as to why humans have a proclivity for this, it's very widespread. It seems to be normal to want to shift one's the way one is in the world for a little, a period of time. I don't think we want to glorify it necessarily. That it could really wreck a person's life too,
yeah,
depending on what they're doing. And but that also underscores that it seems to be an innate, almost a need to do that.
yeah,
That doesn't necessarily play out always in the healthiest ways, but I think overall it's just part of life.
yeah. Well put, thank you. So you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. That's what Audre Lorde, the poet, said.
Mm.
Yvonne Rainer responded. She said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
New tool, my gosh. Wow. Well, we do seem to we need to you know we need to do something about the master's house for sure. But yeah, I'm not a pessimistic person, in general, but or it's the wrong word. I don't, you know, I don't carry a shroud around me, but it's hard to be happy about the direction of things and about the ability to uh, dismantle the master's house. It really needs dismantling, and it's so obvious. You can't have a society that's healthy when a few people have nearly $1 trillion and everybody else can divide up, what's left. It's impossible, and yet that's just a fundamental thing about capitalism: no limits, and it's absurd. It's insane, and it blocks everything. I just don't see how you can move forward uh, with that fundamental reality.
Yeah.
How do you, because that's the master's house, how do you dismantle that? I suppose you can pass a law, you can tax more, but again, we have that it goes hand in hand, that kind of wealth inequality with a dysfunctional political system. It undergirds it. It's not the only cause of it, for sure, but it's a hugely significant factor that can't get around. So, I don't. What new tools? Wow, we each try in our own way to move forward a little bit, but I would be disingenuous if I told you, oh yeah, I know it's this tool we should use or that tool.
Well, I know you're still writing books, so that's a good tool right there. So, you
Uh,
know, um,
Trying, but I'm wondering, it's yeah, I'm still working on writing, of course, but I don't know about. I don't approach it the same way as I did when I was younger, where I was feeling more ambitious for sure.
yeah. Marshall McLuhan, who I'm glad you dropped his name in your book Acid Dreams, learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions.
Hmm.
And so we're not totally aware of how things really shape us, like we brought up printed word, how cell phones shape us. We just sort of embrace these inventions and then they, shape us. And he said we can he McLuhan learned from Pound that we can look to the artists, the writers, filmmakers to reveal the hidden psychic effects so that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about them.
Hmm.
And so the big question McLuhan was constantly tackling was, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though we can turn to the artists to reveal them? What do
Well,
you think?
I mean, the poets don't exactly are on the perch in our society. I think probably half of them are homeless. And I love poetry. To me, it's an acme of language. And it's interesting that you would mention Ezra Pound. We know his fascist connections and so forth, and yet I wouldn't be dismissive of him or his work or McLuhan's interpretation of him. I recall being I had the occasion to take a poetry class with Allen Ginsberg teaching, and he was teaching Pound. Here you have this Jewish guy who was talking in very favorable terms about this poet who was, broadcasting from fascist Italy. So I don't know. I'm more in some ways that's the most intriguing thing about Pound. And I think this idea of poets being antennas or artists being, the canaries in the coal mine in a sense. Um, yeah, but artists are in some ways are so marginalized in society. Poets are even more so. And if you're an artist, I think that how do you make money? You become a rich and famous painter. Well, out of all the painters out there, what are we talking about? 0.0001%. I mean, if anything, the stratification of wealth in those sectors of society are very extreme. It's also that way in the book world. You can be, and the publishing has changed dramatically as a result of the web. Dramatic. I don't think it's still got over the impact of that, but and I like to think I've been fairly successful as a writer. I'm not Stephen King or something like that, but I've been able to support myself and make a go out of it. Granted, with some lean years, but then you go to Hollywood, it's even more extreme. In terms of, it's these days the canaries in the coal mine are really having the toughest time of all. And I'm not sure, yeah, in terms of why they're dying, part of it is just because they're canaries in the coal mine. So
Well put. So do you think artists, meaning general filmmakers, poets, painters, writers, do artists have moral obligation?
I think everybody does. I wouldn't want to. I would hope, but how we interpret that and uh, or how people interpret those obligations and act them out is can be widely divergent. But I wouldn't say any more so than anybody else.
Yeah. Great answer. I appreciate that. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Not generally afraid of ideas, but it's yeah, depends what the ideas are. Old ideas. Hmm, Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Jerry. I mean, when I think of fascism, okay, it's another subject I'm intimately familiar with, and I wrote about extensively. Um, you could say, oh, are those old ideas? Well, they seem to be coming back pretty strong, in maybe morphing into slightly different new forms, or maybe even not, which is even scarier. So maybe it's old ideas I'm more concerned about. But I don't know. It's uh, I mean, in some ways, ideas can be very ephemeral. We need to survive. We're moving into an era of history where there's already enormous stress on societies all over the globe, and how what tools we're going to need to make that transition, whether it entails decommissioning the master's house or not. I don't know. I think it's just overwhelming what we're going into, and we're headed for some very tough times. And,
Yeah.
and most people are already in these tough times. Well, I mean, I haven't taken a poll, but when you look all around the planet, it's not like, I, I, just, I just think of the Arab voice, that long, long wail. That's the cry of humanity. And that's where we're at right now.
Wow. I got that question from John Cage. He says, I can't understand why people are afraid of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones. But then it sort of got updated by this guy, Charles Kettering, who invented the windshield wiper that's intermittent. He said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones.
Well done. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like both those thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, can humans I forgot 2 questions when we were talking about thinking, and I do wanna go back because it sort of follows. Can humans think without language?
That's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, but I think it gets at something very deep in terms of language acquisition and yeah, I'm not sure. That's a very interesting question. That's all I'll say.
Okay, and the beauty is, Martin, you don't have to it's totally fine to say, "I'm not sure, I don't know." This is all about just a flow. Chomsky said that language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mhm.
How do you cope when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, how do you cope?
How do I cope? Well, what do we mean by language breaking down? Uh, it's
Yeah.
if you can articulate very clearly, but if someone is not willing to hear or doesn't understand or imposes their own stuff on and just integrates it into their own worldview. It could be some kind of nutty worldview, a conspiratorial worldview. What are you going to do? That's just what it is. I think we overestimate the power of language, unfortunately. I wish it was, and that might be in part due to just where we're at as a society in technology. I mean, it used to be an age where a book could really have a huge impact. And you think of Jacques Hughes, about the Dreyfus affair. That document what motion picture has ever had that kind of impact? And motion pictures are very dramatic and powerful, but it used to be the printed word can really zing, and really carry, or something like Common Sense and Thomas Paine. I can't imagine a book like that coming out. And it's not that so much that when there isn't someone who can write a book like Common Sense, but that it could have that kind of impact because we, as a society, we're so different now and overwhelmed with quote unquote information of so many different kinds.
Wow, Martin, I've been doing this for about 35, 40 years. And about 10 years ago, I dropped this question because people weren't getting it. But you just brought it up. It's very interesting. The way you don't have to answer it, but I just want to tell you because the whole purpose of this series is to reword, rethink these questions and not, it's all scripted, but this one went Lewis Hines published photos of child labor in newspaper print and matter, and it changed laws.
Mhm.
Upton Sinclair wrote a book, The Jungle. It changed laws. And so my question was always been these were credited as the tipping point to change the laws. And then I would ask the person, can you tell me any music, theater, art, or film that actually was the tipping point to change laws? And I mean, I got all kinds of answers, but it is almost that printed matter did it. And it's
Yeah,
probably,
I
yeah,
agree. I really think so. And again, it's not because if anything, the printed word is less powerful than an image,
yeah,
or a moving image. Let's put it
yeah,
that way.
yeah,
When you think about it, you're less emotionally reactive and so forth. But it just the setting is so different now. When
yeah,
we're overwhelmed with emotionally charged information or imagery or even words that just doesn't have not the same bang for the buck. But I can't. I mean, there's been many amazing, great films, very powerful films, but I can't think of one that would be as powerful as The Jungle in terms of what it meant in
yeah. What
society.
that it changed laws. I mean, the best, probably the greatest political film ever made was Battle of Algiers.
Mhm.
And they asked Guido Pontecarvo, what did your film do? He goes, that taught people how to make films.
It was a great film,
So,
very, very
it,
powerful.
and here's the big key to it was George Bush used it as a training film to deal with terrorists, and the Black Panthers and the Irish used it as a training film to be activists.
Yeah, I
So
know.
that showed you the span of that, and it's basically a fake documentary.
Yeah,
There's only one actor in Battle of Algiers.
yeah. No,
Everybody,
it's a powerful film,
yeah,
and at a powerful moment in history. But
yeah,
again,
yeah,
it doesn't compare to what books have done and meant
yeah,
in human society at certain points,
yeah.
for sure.
I agree. It's amazing that, but uh, being raised the same era, going to Alice Lloyd, that we're sort of on this parallel thinking line. So much of our stuff because Sidney Lumet said, I know films don't do diddly squat, but it ain't going to keep me from trying. And he made socially relevant films his whole career. But let's go back to talking about you a little more. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Very early memories. I think 2 years old. I'm just turning two. I had some kind of a fever, so I was a little bit sick. But kids came over for a birthday party, and I remember being on sort of the top of the stairs of the split level middle class house that I grew up in, with these boxes that kids were giving me, and I would throw them so they're not in any vicious or mean way, so they would
Right.
land on the floor. That's one thing. And also, I have a very early memory of being at Jones Beach. Memories are visceral more than anything else. So, just a sense of being at the beach, and there was a part of an inlet there with the water that was very calm, irrespective of whatever else was going on with the waves. Just being there with the sandbox, and that's
Yeah.
kind of early memories. But they're yeah, that's about the.
Is That was good. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
If you're healthy, it's a blessing. If
Yeah,
you're dealing with if you've got PTSD and you can't let it go, I mean, obviously it's a curse. So it's basically it's key. I mean, memory is the
yeah.
good old hippocampus. That's where new neurons are born. We need that that's where memories are. So
The good old hippocamp. I love that. Okay, so tell me, Martin, a role model or someone had an impact on you within your immediate family, just briefly, and what was that impact? And then outside your immediate family.
in my immediate family and impact, I remember very early on meeting my uncle who had been in concentration camps, and he had the numbers, you know, uh, tattooed to his arm. And I saw the numbers, and what's that? Again, I was single digits, and I remember his name was Max, Uncle Max. He was a very, very nice, gentle man. He couldn't speak English, but he could really express, and express warmth. Um, it's not like so I was mentored by him, but there's a very striking moment. I don't think in terms of immediate family, it's not like I had an older brother who would be mentoring me. I mean, I've had, outside of the family, mentors were also friends. Uh, in a way, it wasn't just strictly a mentorship, but there's a few people, all males. Not sure why that is necessarily, but who were influential in my life, but who I was personally became friends with. Who, for various reasons, I mean, what would be an example of some? It's not that they were all great people with halos, but I think of someone like Carl Oglesby, for example, who was
Yeah.
a University of Michigan graduate, or he was a great orator, Carl. And as an orator, I had great respect from him. And in a sense, in that there was a kind of a mentoring relationship. Not that he was teaching me orator, but as by example, simply, I was like, wow, this guy can really blow on that saxophone at any time, and it sounds interesting. And there was Peter Berg, who's another person I'm very close friends with. Peter was he wrote the Digger Papers.
Yeah.
He died about 10 years ago, and we became very, very close friends. It was a great loss when he died. And he was brilliant and also a curmudgeon, like Carl was, frankly. But I seem to get along well with curmudgeons generally. I find a way, but Peter is feverishly brilliant, not as someone you would emulate as how you should live your life. Same with Carl. But just as a thinker, Peter was really a visionary, as a driving force behind what's referred to as bioregionalism. And Peter, I remember when I went over to his house in San Francisco to interview him for Acid Dreams, when I was gathering information for the social history of LSD, he wouldn't talk to me about the Diggers at all. And that's why I went over to tell me about the Diggers, what happened. But it was one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had in my life that really changed how I look at the world, in a lot of ways, or really opened my eyes. And it didn't matter that I didn't get what I was looking for. Eventually, we became close friends, and he opened up. They were very sensitive, the Diggers, who they would really share what happened from the ones who were still alive and so forth. I appreciate it. But more than anything else, it was his friendship with him, which was fantastic, and became very, very close.
Wow, Martin, that was well put. I appreciate that. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, I mean, my mother's Jewish, which makes me technically Jewish. My father was not. But I was not raised in a religious context. I was not bar mitzvahed. I was given a choice. Um, Although my mother spoke Hebrew, she spoke 5 languages fluently. But she did not impose that, and it was really I respect her for that. So technically, I'm not a man, although, according to that religion, I never went through that ritual. But because I went to a few bar mitzvahs of kids at the school, and I just didn't like the rubber chicken, and
Yeah.
I didn't. I don't know. It just didn't appeal to me, and it was sort of I went my own way.
That is a great metaphor. Do you pray?
Do I pray? I meditate, not in a formal sit down, half an hour a day in a particular room in a particular place. But pray, no, I think more meditate. Work with the breath to calm down, to center, to focus, to relax. Maybe help to get to sleep. Maybe, but prayer, nothing against it. But I don't. Uh, and apparently, it does have physical effects, but so I don't put it down, but it's just
Yeah.
not my thing, really. Or maybe I do, and I'm just not, I hope, is that the same as praying, that something turns out right for this person, or I can get out of this mess that I'm in, or whatever it is. But I don't think of it as prayer.
Yeah.
In a formal sense.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
After I die, I'd say, "Why didn't you talk to me when I was alive, when I really needed you?"
Dude, why didn't you talk to me while I was alive? I've never had that answer. That is brilliant. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think both. I think it gets to a point where it's really hard to say, well, this person just doesn't realize, I mean, I don't know, evil people. People do evil things. And why? You could say out of ignorance, out of greed, out of whatever. If you're doing evil things out of greed, does that make you an evil person? And that's why you're doing it? I don't know. Whatever it is, there's a lot of bad shit going on, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Martin, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And this one I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Michigander Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think I'm thinking what a friend of mine, a doctor who once said to me, she doesn't let other people's chaos get in her way. And enemies cause chaos, and so you don't better not to acknowledge them or engage them if you can. But it's hard if someone's being, I've been the target of some pretty wacko situations with people, and what do you do? I try to just move on and not feed the fire, and not start conversations about it with other people. I'll respond and set people straight if I'm asked about a situation, but I generally too busy to do that kind of. It ends up being kind of petty, and I don't know.
I agree. That's amazing. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I think I don't have any problem with going to the play or seeing the tree on film, as long as that's not the only thing you're doing. But that can only have meaning because you are living a life and you are seeing the real tree and are engaged in real situations. But it's a way of maybe stepping back from your own the particularity of your own situation to get a perspective when it's presented to you by poets, for example, or those with the canaries in the coal mine that might have some valuable insight to offer. Not that only poets do, but so I don't know. I'm. It's not a question I'd be hung up about.
Yeah. Now, just walk us through the through line where you're growing up a reader. Where did you go, hey, I can do that? And then you pursued writing, where did, tell us sort of like, what did you study in college? And you said earlier philosophy, but where did you lean towards specifically research and writing? What do you call yourself, a journalist, a researcher? And what first stimulated that? Like, who were you reading that made you say, I want to follow that calling?
I don't know that it was something reading saying I wanted to do that. Frankly, I didn't know what else to do. That's what I did well. And so it's, you get out of college, you have a BA in philosophy. Obviously, that's a ticket to nowhere, frankly. I mean, what are you going to do with it unless you're going to go on to teach philosophy or go into law or something? I mean, I suppose you can, but I wasn't all that interested in going to graduate school, at least not right away. It didn't seem to me to be the place where creativity really was happening within academia. And I know that's a very broad brush kind of statement. It just, for me, I didn't think it would be the place that would spark my creative urges or nourish my creativity. Not that I ever made a decision. I was good in school. I did good in class. I did very well at the University of Michigan, and I don't think I ever made a decision never to go on with school. I just proceeded with life and with writing, and come what may, and things unfold and situations present themselves, and you get to interact with other people, join other groups, involved in other projects. And I never went back to school. It was all so interesting. I didn't feel I needed to. There were moments, I have to admit, that I wondered, gee, have I done the right thing? Here I am, this and I've got a BA in philosophy, and I'm trying to support myself with these words as a freelance writer. This is getting a little bit, but I don't know. That's just part of it. It was a little bit. It felt walking a high wire act, but it was so interesting. All the different things that unfolded, that it kept me going, and I just sort of followed the path and the opportunities that were there. And it was never for me, first and foremost, about making money. Obviously, you need to support yourself. It was more about, this is interesting, and I want to do it. And if I do it, um, things will emerge and unfold in a way that'll be positive. And it's pretty much how it's worked out. But I also feel I've been kind of lucky too along the way.
But would you say, in sense, you're an investigative journalist and a researcher, someone like I.F. Stone was someone
Oh
like,
yeah.
who was, go ahead.
I mean, there are different. I've done investigative journalism. That's been a focus, but that's not the only kind of writing. My books are more social histories, you might say.
I got it.
The Acid Dreams was a social history of psychedelia. Smoke Signals, the fourth book, was a social history of cannabis. But there was also other things that are happening in between. And I was involved in launching the group FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, in the mid '80s. And definitely, in terms of that project and effort, people like I.F. Stone and George Seldes, and I had the good fortune of meeting George Seldes. I think he was 100 at that age. At that time, it was amazing to meet him. These were the great media critics, and that's what we were doing at FAIR. We followed in their footsteps. I met I.F. Stone as well, and I think I.F. Stone was on FAIR's board of advisors, along with Chomsky and Allen Ginsberg. It's people we've been mentioning him in this conversation. I can't remember. So that was a certain kind of writing that was not really investigative journalism. It was media criticism, and others was social history, and others were investigative journalism. And I guess you can't draw a hard line between all these different forms of writing, but it was more about the subject and the overall project and what impact it could have in those days, where I thought that what we were doing could really have an impact, which I sometimes wonder, if we were.
No, dude, Acid Dreams had an impact, and it still does.
No, I mean, it's a book that has staying power, and definitely, and for some people, for that moment in time, as a generation, we were trying to figure out what the hell happened with the '60s and the psychedelics. Sure, no, but people are still carrying that messianic baggage when it comes to psychedelics. And maybe they didn't read it till the very end. I don't know. Or maybe I wasn't all that clear about that message. Or maybe I wasn't anticipating the possibility of the kind of the recrudescence of psychedelic interests in terms of what's been going on now in recent years.
Martin, I'm glad you brought up George Seldes, because that documentary on him, I've shown political docs for 40 years, and that is just rates as so high. And it's not that it's like a great film. It's just like the guy is so important and nobody knows about him. And it's like,
he's a guy. I'll tell you a story about George Seldes. As I say, I actually visited him twice. One time with Norman Solomon, another time with Chip Burley, two activists who I respect quite a bit. Norman's a close friend. And I remember once being at Seldes's place, and he had heaps of paper all over the place. And he pointed at it, and I said, I just can't keep up with the clippings. He said, he's 100 years old. Can't keep up with the clippings. And we would ask him questions, and he could tell you the color of the button on Mussolini's shirt when he was there. But he could not tell you what happened last week in his life, because he's already but an amazing person, and what he lived through, and it was a wonderful film about him that he referred to. What was it? What was the title of that again? That film?
I forgot the title.
Something Tell the Truth and Run. I think that was it.
Tell the Truth and Run. Yeah, it should be on YouTube free, by the way, because people don't. Yeah, it's the way people are going to see it.
They don't make them like that anymore. Like a George.
No. Yeah.
So the grandfather of media criticism. Yeah.
So important. A screenwriting teacher told me that a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film, great art is when you clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process writing books?
Yeah, I think it's essential for sure, but it's intention intended in a way to allow unintended things to happen. Because if it's just an intention, then it becomes kind of mechanical, and it's not as lively or enlivening the writing. But you have to have an outline. That doesn't mean you stick to it exactly, but I need an outline to work. But I'm always changing it as I'm going along. And again, you have to be. Oh, how is it that something that Peter Berg said? Scripted theater to make something wide open happen. That's what the Diggers were doing in the Haight-Ashbury. They would perform a guerrilla theater. That's a phrase that Peter Berg came up with. But it was not to just mouth the script and perform a pre-written thing, but to do something to allow an event to happen that's not planned, and it could be in that sense street theater. Who knows what's going to happen? But I'd say the same thing for writing and creativity. Just allowing the unexpected to happen.
Yeah, another gentleman in that era was Scoop Nisker. I asked him all these questions, and he said, "If you don't like the news, go out and make your own."
I never seen Flash for sure. He's spoken to some good people. Yeah, those are the
And
days.
so Duchamp says there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your book?
Well, I'm always thinking when I'm writing about the best way to communicate. So I'm always thinking of the reader in the sense of, I mean, I can write it for myself, and somebody might be, particularly if I'm writing about science, which I'm focusing a lot on these days, medical science. You can use phrases and words that people don't understand what they mean. But I have to use those phrases and words in ways that can communicate meaning. So it's always about what does the reader need to hear at this point or to read in the manuscript. And that's all about how you tell a story. So very much with the reader in mind. And so who is the reader? I mean, if you're writing, I mean, presumably you want to write for as wide an audience as possible. But I think it gets kind of specific too. With Acid Dreams, I was writing for people like me who kind of lived through a little bit of the '60s, and where did it go? Why did it happen? What role did psychedelics play in what happened? How does that fit into my life? How do I understand it? And so I was writing for those people, I suppose you could say, who can relate to that experience in some way or shape or form.
McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So clothing is extension of our skin. Knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. What does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness? Whether it's a keyboard or a pencil or a pen.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a tough question because these days you write on a computer. It's not, I don't write with a pen. I might use a pen when I print out a draft to mark it up.
Yeah.
But you're tapping on a laptop most likely, and so what is the extension there from the brain, the mind, whatever, to fingers out into the world through these keys? Interesting question, but I'll use the I don't know how to answer it option for that one.
No problem, Martin. I talked to Michael Apted about 40 years ago when MTV was first coming out, and I said, "Why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast?" Because Marty Scorsese said, "I cut my films faster because of MTV." He said, "Because we've learned to take in information faster." So I asked this question with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Interesting question. I think so. When you think about another language, if I know a language very poorly, a foreign language, I can't take in the information very fast if I'm hearing a conversation at a table and I'm sitting in, wherever I might be in another country. So, we take in information because we talk quick and people understand. But to what avail? To what consequence? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And the real bottom line question is, can humans literally multitask?
It seems my wife can. I'm always amazed. Um, yeah, I suppose so. Why not? But I'm not sure if you can multitask well. Uh, depleted,
You
Um,
you get the question. Well, is the hidden secret word.
I mean, we're constantly multitasking in the sense you hear a sound, it doesn't mean you're responding to it. And you're doing some, the phone rings, you're saying the phone is ringing, even though I'm
Yeah.
typing with some. So I think we're always sort of on sort of like low grade inflammation, low grade multitasking is always happening.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Not, what Herzog says or anthropologists, your hunch.
Very interesting question because it really, mm, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think maybe it's fun, maybe it's a ritual, maybe it's working something out, recording recording something important, an image of a hunt or something like that. But toward what end? You're in a cave. Who else is going to see it? I doubt they were thinking it's going to be discovered 5,000 years later. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, it's something innately human to do art, to express in many different ways, and that's still evident today. But things are, it's term an overlay of commercial culture that really skews things. So obviously they weren't drawing on the walls of a cave because they're hoping to make some money from it. That's not
Yeah.
or they were intending it to be part of a museum exhibit. So but yet there is something fundamental there that I think still drives art in many different forms today.
Yeah, it resonates with McLuhan loved to quote, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So again, it's both and it depends, but what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, what is compromise? I mean, I'm not even thinking in terms of between two human beings. And in some language, the word compromise doesn't exist. Compromise suggests the ability to adapt to a situation. That's what I mean. It's lessening something. If anything, can compel you forward in ways that if you didn't compromise, it would be inappropriate. You'd be stuck, or you'd be hitting your head against the wall, or getting in trouble. So I think of compromise as adaptation. Um, so conviction, but also, I mean, conviction. I think of that project of happiness, right? It's aiming your life in a certain direction, and if you're going off course, you have to have the conviction to sort of keep the eyes on the prize, as it were. So I think both are key.
Yeah, it's really good. It took about 30 years asking that question because that was sort of the question I first got going on interviewing. And took 25, 30 years before someone goes, depends on what you mean by important. So they,
See, sort of.
they shifted conviction and compromise like out of the picture, and they goes, well, what do you mean by important?
No, I think they're both important, frankly. I mean,
Yeah,
but I like the answer to the question that you just
yeah.
mentioned.
Well, also you probably read Walter Boart, Operation Mind Control, an amazing researcher. He said the conviction to compromise. That was his answer.
That's a nice answer, sure.
Yeah. Um, T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Poetry, hopefully. No, yeah.
Nice.
No,
I've never had that answer. It's like laying there
I
ready.
love, but inner dialogue, like thought. They say monkey mind, is how it's
Yeah.
described. the mind jumping all over the place. But there's a lot of potential for creativity there
Yeah.
if you can keep up with it or harness it, or so I don't know.
No, it's great. A Abigail Childs, this, great experimental filmmaker in New York a couple years ago said, "What language is your inner dialogue in?" She goes, "I wish I knew."
Yeah,
That's a great answer.
I think I'm being a little bit. I'm not exactly being entirely sincere when I say it's poetry.
Well,
Yeah,
no, that's good. Hey, I'm just here we're just here to have fun.
ocean of poetry. Let's put it that way.
What is the function of poetry?
The function of poetry, boy, to evoke a world beyond functionality. I don't think of,
Oh, functionality is
you know,
great.
I don't think of it's not so much functional yet very, very important. It's a poem, it can come from a place that's I don't want to say egoless or speak, in a
Yeah,
kind of a new age way, but a poem is spontaneous, something's coming through. And I think a powerful poem or powerful phrase carries the birth slime of that experience in some ways, so that one then reads it and you convey that sense, not consciously. It's just that it's there. It's coming
yeah,
from a unitary place, and it can evoke that kind of experience in the reader. It's almost like a virus,
yeah.
William Burroughs,
Wow.
word virus.
Yeah, there you go. But did you say birth slime, SLIME?
Yeah, I did. I don't know if that's
That
the right word, but
that was that
you're
was pretty
very,
dang poetic right there.
yeah, well, it's kind of funky, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, revisit the words to Frank Zappa's song, "I Am the Slime" from your video. It is amazing how that exactly applies to today. Every line in that song.
That's, I'd have to go back on that one. I I like
Yeah.
Frank Zappa, but I don't remember that one. Yeah.
Um, is perception reality?
Well, it's how you access reality. So I'm not sure if it is reality, but it's your portal to reality. And, but it's a very fundamental question. This
Yeah,
is philosophers have been, stewing over for a long time.
yeah,
Perception and where the real world ends and begins, and if it's in your head or it's not in your head. Uh, this has been the great quandary of Western philosophy. You know, when you see something, what is actually out there and what is in your head. If you're colorblind, the colors are not out, and all that stuff. And I love Hegel's interpretation of that. The inability of the leading minds in Western culture to agree on where the mind ends and the hard reality begins, and that inability to agree on where you draw the line is laid the groundwork for fascism, basically. And that Hegel didn't use it because someone can come along and say this is reality, because we seem on some basic fundamental metaphysical existential epistemological sense we don't know. Is John Locke right? Is Descartes right? Or is Berkeley right? And it's all in your head. You have again the greatest thinkers in Western philosophy couldn't agree on this basic thing. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you we're in deep shit, frankly. And and you have a authoritarian come along and just define the reality for you. Because it's not like you're thinking on this stuff that most people think, gee, yeah, is what I'm seeing and is it in my head or is it part of it in my head? It's not like people think about that, but underlying, in some unconscious sense, sort of feeding it all, there is that basic uncertainty in Western culture, I think, that has really put us into a cul-de-sac.
yeah. Boy, it really resonates with me because, the Hegel line into fascism was interesting because Mussolini invented film festivals, and coming from Ann Arbor, you know, cinema's 130 years old, basically. Ann
Mhm,
Arbor Film Festival is 60 years old next year. That
mhm.
is like half the amount of the invention's length. And my film festival's 31 years old, and sometimes I think film is like the most prominent means to let fascism grow,
Well,
to
I
really nurture.
to their credit, as that's a funny way of putting it, but they were astute enough to realize a presentation and I mean, look what they did with you know, the cinematography of Hitler's speeches and all that.
Yeah.
They got it. This is very, very powerful. But and I also have to say, one of the things I really liked about going to school in Ann Arbor um, was, this was before you can just go and press a button and get any film you want on your tele. You know, the film stuff that would every twice a week you had these really interesting films that I was never exposed. Fellini and Ingmar Bergman. That was great to me. That was a wonderful part and really enriching experience of going to school in Ann Arbor and having access to that kind of information, if you will. Our art is really yeah, that was really
Yeah.
eye-opening for me.
No, we were super lucky in regards to music too. So, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're taught to overcome a weakness. Tell
Mhm.
me a weakness that you've incorporated to become a strength.
And it's interesting. I'm familiar with Feldenkrais, and I happen to be dealing with a very sore shoulder, and and which is relevant to what Feldenkrais can do, or body work, or physical therapy for that matter. I think that maybe emotional things, of, learning to be in relationships and learning from them. I happen to be very happily married now. We're in our 30th year. I'm very lucky in that regard. But had I not been through what I had been through before that, I met my wife, I might not have been able uh, to be the person I am in that situation. So I think you without getting too specific, but just learning to give people space,
Yeah.
learning to, how, I don't want to go off on a big tangent about that, but I think that's a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and I love this question because when I know someone who's been together, how do you explain your longevity of your marriage?
Luck, number one.
That's a good
Uh,
answer.
well, not total luck. I think I deserve to be well married, in some sense.
Yeah,
um, we happen to move through life in a way that really, really works, and that we complement each other, and that it's nothing is effortless, but that comes pretty close.
yeah.
I don't know, just it's uh,
Well, well put, Martin. I didn't laugh to say it. I love that word, but I also wonder what's the most just to you, what's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
well, they both women react to marijuana differently, according to the mouse studies. I don't
Is
know,
that really true? What
No,
do they say?
well, I've been writing a lot about medical science, and particularly about cannabinoids and the cannabis therapeutics and all that. And I attend science conferences every year. I mean, really very rigorous events. You were talking Nobel laureates speaking there, not for the faint of heart. And I remember a few years ago at one of these, yearly conferences of the International Cannabinoid Research Society, that a presentation was made about the fact that they were always using male mice in their experiments, and how they got some female mice and everything came out different, and they were going to have to go back and look at everything they did and not project the results as if this applied to everybody, that there is a gender difference, and they're talking about very, very fundamental biological physiological processes. The endocannabinoid system is a fascinating subject, and they work differently, with among men and women, to some degree. So that's pretty profound. Now, how that manifests, you know, I don't know, but we're still at the beginning of that, figuring out that mistake from the science, from the scientific point of view.
Well, that was a great insight that I wasn't aware of. So a couple questions just going political because I've listened to Fair's radio show for years, and I really appreciate everything you've done with Jeff Cohen and starting Fair. And one is Utah Phillips says that anarchy is making rules for yourself and not others. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, that's where you need compromise and consensus and not just conviction, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. You would like to think that there's real value in democracy, but it's democracy's in retreat all around the world. But even in that sense, you would like making the rules when it's outside the scope of a community gets very, very tricky because then you get layers of hierarchy and things like that. I would like to think community makes the rules,
Yeah.
but community can't be so big and that it becomes unwieldy. I think of like Native Americans sitting around, in a circle in a teepee. They made some good rules, it seems. But yeah, so that's a tricky one.
That-
I
that's good.
consider myself in some sense an anarchist, in some sense, in that as a decentralist. And I always love what Peter Berg used to say about bioregions are the locations where decentralization happens. That's the physical situation for an anarchic society has to be governed by that. Has to actually, the physical place that you live in. But yeah, but those things, anarchism, I don't know, Marxism, these are 19th century philosophies, basically, and we're in the 21st century. I think we may need some new ideas that you were saying earlier on. I
Yeah.
think we need some new ones in that regard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then again, there might be a lot of value in the old ones too. I don't know.
What George Lakoff said it well. He said we got to use the new ways and invent. We got to use the old ways and invent new ways. You got to
Well,
integrate both of them.
well put.
But I'm curious. You're a wordsmith. I was challenged recently on that. I say anarchy is making rules for yourself and not others. Utah Phillips. Who's entitled to make the rules? They go, you shouldn't say the word entitled. You should say who should make the rules or who, what verb would you think is best to put in there? Entitled, I see how they made this, it's a little funny. Like who should? What would you say the verb that you would like to hear there?
I don't know. It's a good question, but I guess I prefer should to entitled just because I think
Who
we misunderstand.
should?
I think it's very
Yeah.
easy to uh, that can be kind of a bit of a mind bender. But then again, in other societies, uh, whether it's the chief or the shaman or whatever, that they were more entitled to in that
Yeah.
context. So I don't know. It's a tricky word. It's a tricky question given where we're at today. I just hope we have.
It's like all that. One person said, "You're trying to trick me," and I goes, "All words are tricky." If what I should say is who should / entitled to make the rules. Give them both. So then, if they want to bitch about entitled,
You can say
okay. So
the poets should make the rules.
yeah, the poets.
Contra the poets, contra Plato. But not to Ezra Pound. He should be the one. Although he was an amazing.
I like that. I think there's a poem that says that. Okay, so where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. John Basil Barnhill. Then in 2005, V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs or the war on poverty or the war on terrorism? That great government guy says you can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight, and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So this better than anyone, Martin. This war on drugs. How do you handle a false fear like that when it's laid upon this society?
Well, you become like a guerrilla, and not GOR but GUE, and that you're uh, fighting against enormously powerful social forces. And I'm not sure if fighting is the right way to be thinking about it. in a very, very concrete sense, that's what we did with CBD when we introduced CBD in Northern California, and going back to 2010. It was a very conscious effort to liberate cannabis from the drug abuse paradigm. That was the hope, and that in doing that, it would have that result. And this is before CBD went, I mean, we were the first to work with it. You again, you're dealing with these titanic, overwhelming social forces, political forces. What can a person or a few people do in that sense? I in eternal respect for people engaged in political organizing in a grassroots way to move society forward in a better way. And I've been involved in that in my own life in varying degrees, although not so much in the last bunch of years. I've been just more as a writer, person hanging on. But I think you got to it's David and Goliath. The power is so immense, So just get in there. I mean, the CBD thing is a good example because it didn't quite end up the way we thought. But when we introduced it, it really from the point of view of the drug control apparatus. Can we say the word fucked? We fucked them so bad on that. They did not handle it. And that was the idea. How are they going to deal with they will never be able to swallow the pill of CBD because they will never be able to come up with a reason why it should be illegal. And
Yeah.
we saw it as where it was introduced at a time when there was a lot of pressure on the medical cannabis community in California. Obama was president early on. He was not a friend to medical cannabis. I think he was bending over the other direction because everybody knew he was a weed smoker as a teenager or whenever, and he was trying to prove to the powers that be that he was one of them, I guess, or something. Whatever. I don't need to get into his head, but we thought that this was really going to be, like poking it right in the eye, or the metaphor I use, like putting a needle, acupuncture needle, into the body politic and turning it. And that's what we did when we introduced CBD into the medical marijuana experience in California. And 8 years later, it was the biggest thing on the planet in terms of as a nutritional supplement. And I'm not sure that was necessarily a good thing, but there was at some point where Coca-Cola was talking about putting it in their drink, at which point I think I nearly broke down and cried. Like I thought we could take a victory dance. No, we can't. Because look what happened. Just the opposite. But no, it was what it was. You can't control all these big forces. That's an example of how a little thing done at the right moment, interjected in the right situation with the right intention. We weren't out to make money. We weren't going to do a CBD brand and bring it. That was not what it was about at all. It was putting it out there. It's what we did, and now it's my burden. I have to deal with it. No, I don't regret it. It's just that it's when you loosen the energies like that, you can't control what it's going to happen. All sorts of things could happen, and in that sense, it did having an impact. It changed the law and made it so it was legal to grow hemp. So you have this little molecule that literally changed the law. It's a powerful molecule. But look at the commercial aspects of it. It's just a complete mess. It's what it ended up becoming. So, but so it goes.
Yeah. Well, you did well. And it's amazing how you're learning to cope with the hidden psychic effects. You couldn't predict every effect. This is called unintended consequences, and it doesn't stop you. It's like the follow-up question would be, what does courage mean to you now?
You say, what does what?
Courage mean to you? Yeah.
Oh, wow. I guess it applies to conviction, having the courage of your convictions. I think courage and foolishness for me kind of come pretty close, because I've done things that look very courageous, or could be interpreted that way. Or in some ways, I'm like, what the hell have I done? What have I gotten myself into here? This is really the blowback's pretty intense. Sometimes it seemed very foolish, but I don't know. Courage, it's a good quality.
It is. You got it. It reminds me of that saying. It goes, if the fool persists in his folly, he becomes wise.
William Blake. I've said that 1,000 times to people.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that portion of Blake, the Proverbs of Hell. fantastic. I quote a lot
Yeah.
of them, actually. Yeah.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Oh God, maybe I believe on some level that it's possible we can deal with the mess we've made as a species, or I just am not. I refuse to. I guess we go forward hoping, but yeah, that would be. And I mean, I don't know. Life can have many miraculous things to be thankful for, but I'm not sure. Good old Lewis Carroll.
Well,
He,
it reminds me of another person we were luckily exposed to in Ann Arbor, Sun Ra. He said,
uh,
the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change.
It's funny. Well, also was, Louis Rackham of Rackham Auditorium at the University of Michigan, who illustrated Alice in Wonderland. Those famous illustrations are from from Rackham. Uh,
Oh my God, I gotta look those up. That's amazing. I saw some of the most incredible concerts in my life at that auditorium.
Beautiful auditorium. Yeah, yeah. I was last time I was in Ann Arbor. I went. They invited me to go back and speak, and I spoke in that auditorium. So I started my lecture with one of his drawings from Alice in Wonderland. It was a good way to
How
start.
nice.
Yeah.
What amazing. We were lucky to be there. And so, tell me, Martin, one major element of your creative output, your work, your calling that's changed, and one major element that stayed the same in your, 4 decades plus doing it.
Well, I don't think I'm as reckless as I used to be, in terms of, it used to be if I wanted to go after something, I would go after it and expose this injustice, whatever it would be. Um, part of it is just getting older, and just energy levels and whatnot. But I would not at this point in my life go and hang out in a bar a neo-Nazi bar in East Berlin, like I did while I was writing Beast Reawakens. That's a bit crazy. I was really in some. When I look back at the situations I was in, I was I didn't allow myself to think of it. I was putting myself in dangerous situations, and but they were also quite interesting too. I was able to sit down with German neo-Nazi leaders and really have an interesting conversation with them, where I'd get them laughing and things like that. There was one time I remember there was a guy, I don't mention his name even. I wrote about it in Beast Reawakens, but I was at his house. I think it was like 3 a.m. This neo-Nazi leader, and he was from in Munich, and he was wearing a T-shirt that was from Levi's, And I pointed out, I said, you're Jewish, And he said, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I said, well, and he goes, well, Jews, they can laugh at themselves. Germans, we cannot laugh at ourselves. And then I said something to him, and he cracked up. Well, but you just proved. I said, so Ewald, so maybe you have some Jewish blood in you. He said, no, 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 I don't. It was sort of those kind of weird dialogues I was having with it. I wouldn't do that these days. But again, that's the subject. It's interesting. I kind of was a little bit early on the topic because I wrote The Beast Reawakens, which would be quite an apt title to write about Trumpism and all that in the United States and the current state of right-wing populism and neo-fascism. My book came out in '97. It was way ahead of its time. But yeah, but I don't have the wherewithal the heart to update that, frankly.
Yeah.
That's not a matter of danger. I just don't have the time or the space to get into all that again. Writing about Nazis, and that's the worst subject you can write about, particularly if you have Jewish relatives who died in concentration camps. But for me, it was like almost like an alchemical process. I'm taking something that's the worst and making beautiful words, even though you know what I mean. It's words that have a rhythm and that you read it and that describe a character, and that was my way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Others, people who are children of Holocaust victims or really carry that burden. I think that was my way of moving past that, actually. And I don't feel like going back there. I would say to people, it was my third book, The Beast Reawakens. And when I wrote about cannabis and the smoke signal, I say, yeah, it's a lot more fun writing smoke signals than it was writing The Beast Reawakens. I really like hanging around with the smoke signals people more, in that world. It was just something I had to do with The Beast. It was also an important subject, I felt. And, we saw something emerging that I never thought it would come to this in the United States as it has, but it has. So.
Yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
Oh, wow. It's that aiming the direction again in life, and just the day to day, the small things, keeping things going, doing
Yeah.
what you have to do in a very prosaic kind of way. I mean, I'm not a depressive person in general. Obviously, everybody has their moments, and thankfully, that's just not a burden of mine. I see other people, particularly young people, really going through a lot of difficult times. But I don't know, just the day to day, focused on what did Sartre say about good therapy is having a goal, and making a goal and achieving it. And that might be, a list with do the laundry, go out and get something from the store, and just do all those things that you have to do, and it's done. And that's keep your feet on the ground. But you feel it's very, very. I feel there's enormous stress right now, and it does impinge on you personally. I mean, we're in Northern California. The fires are are just terribly stressful, and we wonder: are we living in the right place? Should we be moving? What should we do? I know when I moved to Northern California in '96, it's like moving to paradise, frankly. And now I'm wondering, like, wow, it was so after the last time we had to evacuate last summer, that my wife and I actually talked about, are we in the right place? Where would we move? And then you come up with the question, well, where do you go to escape climate change? And there's really not many places make that list. But, the fact that we even have that conversation, and that's just climate change. Then you look at the political situation, and obviously they're connected, and the paralysis and the denial. And, if you have politicians who can deny that what's going on with the coronavirus, where it's very vivid, people are dying in hospitals, to think that they're going to really meet the challenge of climate change, which even though, we're in the middle of Hurricane Ida today, right? Worse than Katrina. Well, right now it's happening. And every week there's something like this now. That's not in California. We have the fires. Everywhere else has other things. But it's how can we move forward if we can't even coalesce with one mind or mutual respect around how to deal with this virus? It seems very weak, and I'm not a bleak person, but it's daunting.
Yeah, it's on. Listen, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll bring Clinton on. It's really been a pleasure and an honor. Martin, thank you for being so dang articulate. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
It's funny, because I 12 year, if you had picked it 15, it would have been easier for me to answer that question.
Do it at 15.
At
Yeah.
15, I would have said, you know what, it's going to be okay. You just
Yeah.
what you're going to do, just it's going to be okay. So at 12, it was for me at least still a kind of a moment of innocence, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Not burdened by the existential questions and just the obvious things that one goes through, but a little bit later in life. So the 12 years, I don't want to say it was idyllic, but it was a lot easier, and I don't associate it with the burdens of overthinking things and worrying and all the things that one has to go through, I think, in life as a younger person to become a mature person. But I would say basically, don't worry. Keep going. Keep going. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bring Clinton on now. That's funny because I did forget to ask you, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night? But I think don't worry is a great advice. So Clinton, you can come on now and ask a question if you want. And Martin, what a pleasure. Thank you so much, Clinton. What do you got?
It's been a pleasure for me too, and I appreciate your persistence. And I was a little bit hard to get there for a while. Part of it, I didn't quite understand what you were after, but I'm very
Oh,
glad
no,
I
it's
chance for the
you,
conversation.
the great word you said earlier was fun. It's about having fun, but being articulate too. And there were a lot of deep things you brought up.
Cool.
So, Clinton, go ahead.
Yeah, wonderful conversation, guys. There's so many different places I could go. I suppose really I just have to ask a question regarding uh LSD and its role in, say, like the 60s spiritual awakening. I've been reading lots of Camille Paglia in this regard, say, for instance. So she likes to talk about, she has this essay, cults and cosmic consciousness, and sort of the way that religion and drugs and the religious experience as stimulated by drugs is also conflated now, where you see, neuroscientists and psychologists talking. Sometimes you're talking about, say, psychedelic drugs or just anything psychologically active as therapeutic, and then sometimes it switches to this religious language,
Mm.
and they always tend to seem to blur the lines, and then you wonder, have they been talking to like they've been doing experiments, but have they been talking to like self-described shamans and and whatnot? Do we need to differentiate between the spiritual experience and the psychedelic experience, or the sort of transformational experiences that drugs do to people, in psychologically speaking, or in this, or where do we draw the line between that and like sacralizing it? Do you know what you see
No,
what I'm
it's an
reaching for?
interesting question. It's a very interesting question. There's a lot there to unpack, and I could speak on it for an hour, which I won't right now.
Sure.
How would I answer that? There was a point at which people started referring to psychedelic drugs as entheogens. I
Mm.
mean, you experience within that is this godly thing that you consume it and then you experience that. And I never really warmed up to that phrase because my feeling was so much of what these psychedelics are is that it's context dependent. And when the CIA and the Army were experimenting with these drugs and using them for their own nefarious purposes, they were not entheogenic. I can say with assurance. But I think that the danger here is that people project onto these amazing compounds their own experiences, and then there's that from Whitehead. There's that phrase of what is it? It'll come to me in a minute. The fallacy of misplaced concreteness.
Oh.
Their own experience, and then they place it onto the drug as if that's what's in the drug itself. That's the molecule is spiritual. And I don't know. I think that it's very possible to have transcendent experiences and visionary experiences without clothing it in a mystical language.
Mhm.
And that's perfectly fine. And in fact, that might even be more what goes on for people in our own desacralized culture. Um, and that they're no less valid, those experiences for that. I, maybe it's just me, but I don't, I respect how people describe their experiences, but I'm not drawn toward mystical language. I once went to one of these conferences at MAPS, Rick Doblin's group on that's been promoting psychedelic research, and they've done an amazing job bringing it to the point where it is. But one of their conferences was they had a lecture. I think it was a guy from Johns Hopkins talking about the mystical experiences induced by psychedelics, and he was going through the charts and answer the question from 1 to 10. You had an ego loss experience from 1 to 10, and you 8. And he went through all it. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is the most boring lecture I have ever heard in my life about something that is the most interesting and engaging experience. Who cares if it's 1 to 8 or 7 or 10, and it has to be, But again, that's what they're trying to do. And there's no doubt that a deep experience that some might call or project onto it as being religious or mystical, and it might indeed be that. There's a lot of value in that in terms of a therapeutic outcome. It does contribute to kind of a long-lasting effect. But a lot of so-called psychedelic research these days is not oriented toward psychedelic assisted therapy. It's taking a molecule, or what they call a scaffold, a chemical scaffold, and tweaking it, because these drugs do more than just change the mind. They also impact inflammation and migraines, et cetera, et cetera. We had a piece we did at Project CBD about phantom limb pain.
Mhm.
And some research showing that with psychedelics, you can actually deal with that pain. And there's nothing that can cure phantom limb pain. But they're just amazing research. So there's something going on there that's beyond necessarily, the dazzling lights and whatnot, which to me is so much an important part of the experience. So there's a lot going on in this field now,
Mhm.
of which the sort of the mystical thing is a part of it, an important part of it. But increasingly, in terms of the scientific research, they're moving away from that, and they're looking at, how if you tweak the psilocybin or the iboga molecule, you get something that helps a particular condition and without hallucinations.
Mhm.
That's what they're after. And it really reminds me of where we went wrong with CBD. That the value is somehow that it doesn't get you high. That's the big, that's where things went off course. The value of CBD is not that it doesn't get you high, is that you can modulate the high. And because with therapeutic cannabis, that's the first challenge, managing psychoactivity. CBD can help you do that. The purpose is not to not get you high. Maybe for some people, that's what works. So I think with psychedelics, it's a fascinating area. And I happen to be talking about it, and I have to do a lecture on this, which would be in Los Angeles, by the way, next the CanMed conference. I could send you some information about. You're based in Los Angeles, right?
I am. Clinton's in Canada, but yeah, we will. What you just send us a link or let us know, and we can put it in the chat. Yeah.
Clinton, where are you based in Canada?
Oh, Ottawa, actually.
Well, Ottawa. See, I always think Canada, automatically Vancouver. But in Canada, I think again, things are changing with psychedelics, and I think in Canada, it's they've decriminalized as they've done in some states in the United States, decriminalize the use of psychedelics, or at least they're providing some kind of social space, not a social space, a space in the society to allow this under a more controlled setting. So I don't know. I just, part of the problem, this is a bone to pick. I would, if Timothy Leary was still alive, I would pick it with him a little bit. But the idea that you take this drug and then you should interpret it in terms of mystical experience. And if you don't have that experience, then you're some kind of dumb shit that didn't get it, which is not the case. You have an experience. You just you approach it with an open mind, hopefully with a guide and somebody who's had the experience, and come what may. And oftentimes it could be really, really helpful in terms of some kind of a revelatory insight into one's life. And I feel that was where, I've had those kind of experiences, but I wouldn't assume that somebody else would necessarily. They'd have their own kind of experiences. And I just think you're creating a tension that's unnecessary when you say the mystical experience, losing your ego is the ultimate thing, and if you don't experience that, somehow you've missed something. Where, we talk about losing your ego, it's just a bunch of words describing an experience that might not really get at it even. Because if you lose your ego, how do you remember anything about it? I remember very vividly, last time I took LSD was on the first day of spring in 1980. And I remember very vividly what happened during there. So I don't know if I lost my ego or whatever, but I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in my life. And I've lived in the echo of that experience since then. And a lot of what I've, been involved in and reflects that interest in healing modalities and so forth. So, but to each their own. Everybody has a different kind of experience, and my experience is that people have. But there does seem to be commonality of you can really have some breakthroughs, and it's very, very intense. Assuming it's the psychedelic, not the unpsychedelic psychedelic that a lot of the scientists are interested in right now because they think they can get it, past the FDA that way. So
yeah,
that's a long answer to the question.
That was a great question, Clinton. Did you have a follow up or?
Well, so because I'm a McLuhan scholar, my interpretation of what a mystical experience is me it's something that happens to someone who's usually very typographically inclined or linear thinking or logical in the first place. So then when they break out of that for the first time, it's mystical because it's a sudden change into a sort of awareness that the oral person is used to and is normal with, right? Is do you- eh, does that make sense with what you understand about the different varieties of psychedelic experiences or psychoactive experiences?
Yeah, I think so. I think, in our
Squares have crazier trips, I guess is what I'm
well,
saying.
experiences that, in a peyote Indian ceremony, let's say,
Yeah.
in the American church, uh, how the people participating in that experience understand that experience and what they come away with
Mhm.
might be quite different from taking peyote in our situation. Because yes, we live in a desacralized world. So you bring in something like a psychedelic, which really vividly can project you into another kind of space, which you say, wow, it's mystical because it's so different from our normal way of being.
Yeah.
Whereas in other cultures, if you're growing up where, when you're 13 years old, you're going to be given a hallucinogenic drug and you're going to go up deep in the forest on the mountaintop to have an experience. It's not whatever the experience. They might not consider it mystical. It's, oh yeah, that's the 13-year-old rite of passage experience.
Yeah.
It might be super mystical if it was us, but so part of it is the context. I think a
Mhm.
lot of. I'm not
Now,
down on talking about it in terms of mystical experiences, but I think that we have to be very, very careful, and that because I do sense again that the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. That's the LSD temptation, or the say. It's very, very easy because it's so powerful. These experiences to assume your own experience is sort of like the model for everybody else, and that's what is in the drug that will produce that experience.
Mhm.
Where you can really get into trouble that way, I think.
Excellent.
brilliant. Thank you, Clinton. That's like quoting Whitehead. That's something McLuhan was fond of as well. But
Yeah.
the question really goes full circle for us. Martin and I were in Alice Lloyd, the dormitory at
Mhm.
University of Michigan, where every Friday night they showed Alice in Wonderland 16
Right.
millimeter print of the Disney film, and everybody would take pot or LSD to get high and party. We were like, oh my God. But then it might result in someone having an altered consciousness and an epiphany,
Oh
or
yeah.
they might freak out. But it basically, we weren't going into it like maybe. Martin, we were lucky because we came into that scene right at the beginning when it wasn't like you need a guide, you have to know that you're getting into this very dangerous thing and or not dangerous thing, excuse me. You're getting into this altered consciousness state as opposed to, hey, we're just partying and getting high, you know.
A
So
lot of different roads can get you there. Yeah.
yeah,
I remember in Ann Arbor very vividly, the kids riding the elevator up and down, and they were on acid. I said, "Get out of the damn elevator!" It's also it was so cold in the winter. I remember one time, my girlfriend at the time, who had never tripped before, we did this together, and we couldn't walk outside because it was so cold at night. It was literally below zero, and I was very worried about her. That was the one time I would say I had a bad trip in the sense of it wasn't fun, and it was like, oh, I got to hold on here, just ride it out.
yeah.
That's sometimes
And
it
we
happens.
were lucky. We had the arboretum where there was lots of trees and we could go experience nature. And most people know nature's a great place to trip
Yes,
in.
yes. And that's not the experience that people are having these days. And when they go,
Yeah.
even in psychedelic assisted therapy, they're going in a room, they lie down, there's a man and a woman sitting next to them as guides, they put on the glasses over, and they go, and yeah, I'm not saying that's not a valuable experience. People report therapeutic breakthroughs, particularly with depression, and that's a serious issue. But I'll take the walk in the orb any day over being in a room in a clinic. God, I can't think of a more lousier place to trip. Be in the room.
Right.
It's so anyway. But this particular time in Ann Arbor, it was so cold, and it was also at night. You couldn't go out; it would be dangerous. Literally, those were the days before climate change really roared into our lives. We're talking
Yeah.
about in 71, 72. So
Yep.
we're showing our age, Jerry. So
Well, thank you so much, Martin and Clinton. This has been fun. The last question, Martin, if you want to sum up here, what gives you the most optimism?
oh, it's a tough moment to be optimistic. The fact that people, we're in the majority in terms of wanting social change in the right direction. We are the majority. It's just that somehow or another things have been done so that we're that even to be in the majority is a challenge to have that translate into a political reality. And I'm not saying the Democrats that's us and we're a majority. It is kind of astonishing that several of the presidents recently they didn't get most votes. I thought that's what's supposed to happen. Majority rules. And it's a fight for the majority to rule at this point, if you want to talk about it in this sort of basic political way. But at least we're in the majority.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much, Martin. Clinton, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you all. It's been a
Good evening,
pleasure.
gentlemen.